everybody. My name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. Today I'm doing another edition of Stupid Things Conservatives Say. This one is also about gun control. So the first thing I want to start off with is this. Every time there's a shooting or a massacre or something, I always hear the same type of false equivalency fallacy coming from the right. Usually it'll be something like this. Since X causes more death than guns, how come we don't outlaw X? And it'll be something like, well, more people die from car accidents than from actual shootings. So how come we don't outlaw cars? Or, more people die from food poisoning than, mass murder. So how come we don't outlaw ham sandwiches? And it's a classic false equivalency fallacy, because cars, the intended usage of cars is not to kill people, right? The intended usage of sandwiches is not to kill people, it's to feed people. The intended usage of a gun is to kill somebody. That's what guns are designed for. So if you wanted to make that comparison and not have a false equivalency, you would need to compare the number of intentional murders by car with the numbers of intentional shootings. That way, it's not a false equivalency, right? Because the other way is like comparing apples and oranges, right? And that's one thing that, so conservatives say shit like that because they think it makes sense, and it doesn't actually make sense. It makes you look stupid, right? The other thing that I hear a lot from these people whenever you bring up gun control, and you'll bring up something like for example, in the 90s in Australia, Australia enacted, they enacted some pretty aggressive gun control, right? And over the course of a few years, they managed to get a lot of the excess weapons off the street. And as a result, you don't have these kinds of massacres in Australia, right? That example is brought up a lot by gun control advocates. They'll bring up that example because it's a good example of a country taking proactive steps and reducing the amount of gun violence in their country in a voluntary way. Right. Australia had voluntary gun buybacks and things like that. And they also restricted the type of weapons you can have and the number of magazines you can have and so on, right? So they didn't outlaw guns in Australia. You can still go and own a firearm. You can buy a firearm. You just have to, there's a lot more restrictions on it. And as a result, they don't have these kinds of shootings. Shootings like this happen there. They're just very rare, right? Well, by contrast, in the United States, anybody can buy a gun. One thing you'll hear from conservatives a lot, they'll say, well, cities that don't have, cities that have gun control laws, they don't work, and then they'll cite Chicago as an example. They'll say, well, Chicago is has the highest amount of crime in the world and blah, 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 blah. And, but they have really tough gun laws. How come it doesn't work? And the reason why it doesn't work in Chicago is because you can go an hour outside of the city and buy a gun without any of the restrictions that are in Chicago, right? A better example would be not the amount of gun violence, but rather the flow of weapons, right? And there's a pretty good article that I just read recently that explains this that I'll put in the thing. Basically, those guns that are traced back, those guns that are involved in an act of violence in Chicago, when they trace them back, they find out they weren't bought in Chicago. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that people that are trying to buy guns in Chicago are having to go through other channels, right? And it's slowing the flow of guns into illegal channels, right? So they have to go to straw buyers, which if you don't know what that is, that's where you get a guy to buy a gun for you because you can't pass a background check or something. They're having to go to neighboring states to buy the gun, stuff like that, right? Well, a better example than Chicago of a successful gun control in the United States would be New York. So if you look at New York, they have the same type of gun control laws statewide, okay? And the flow of guns has slowed significantly in New York, from those guns that are purchased in New York to those that are used in a crime are slowed a lot. And it's just, the data doesn't lie. That's the thing, is that, if you look at where the guns are coming from, and how long it is between that gun being bought and being used and things like that, it's pretty apparent that gun control legislation actually does work to reduce crime. It reduces the number of guns that are used in crimes, right? And as a side effect of that, less people die. So the reason why you see in places like Chicago, where there's a lot of crime and there's a lot of gun crime, is because those gun control laws that are there are being undermined by close nearby areas that don't have the same kind of gun control. You know, it does. I mean, that's pretty. It's pretty. I don't know. I think it's convincing. It's enough. The evidence is there enough to convince me. So I mean, I leave it up to you. Check out the article. It's actually pretty good. And so as of this video, I just heard on the news right when I got out of work today. It's roughly 3 p.m. or 5 p.m. on a Friday, the 9th, right? That so we had this shooting last week in Oregon, and I've just heard on the news that there were 2 more campus shootings, and one of them was in. Luckily, these were not mass shootings, but they were just like people getting shot on campus. One of them was in San Diego. And it just kind of blows me away. It's like, you hear these things on the news where they say shit like, oh, there's one every day and stuff like that. There really, really, truly is one every single fucking day. It's like the next day, there's another shooting on a campus. It's like, when are we going to do something about it? When are we going to like wake up and do something about this problem? Because it's obviously a problem. And the way I see it is that when people pass off these fallacies, when conservatives use these fallacies and to try to, because they're afraid that people are going to take their toys away, that's what's getting in the way of us doing something about this problem. That's why we have people getting shot to death on a daily basis in this country, is because there's one segment of the population who doesn't understand critical thought. And I don't know, it just blows me away that in the United States we're supposed to be like the USA is supposed to be the best country in the world. That's what we tell ourselves, right? But it's becoming this country is fucked up. This is a symptom. That's what it is. Like, people shooting each other is a symptom of a greater sickness. And I think that sickness is the people in this country are uneducated. I think that's what it comes down to, is that people in this country are uneducated and they don't know how to think critically. That contributes to it, at least. I don't know if that's the underlying cause. So anyway, kind of got a little bit off topic there. So adios, folks.